Suruchi Bhadwal. Currently, I am working with this beautiful organization, if I were to say, where I've spent 22 years now. It's called the Energy and Resources Institute. Many people know it with its acronym, actually, TERI. It's based out of New Delhi. It's got some other regional offices in other parts of the country in India. And the focus of the organization has always been in terms of doing research in the energy and environmental space. It's now 22 years plus, and I'm into my 23rd year of work at TERI, working on climate and related issues. And as I had mentioned before, ideally, whenever I talk about the climate and what I do in the organization, very simply in my trainings, I just tell people that I'm doing or working on everything under the sun, because that's what we are saying, that it's warming out there, and therefore every sector is likely to get affected. And then what are those impacts of climate that are likely to be experienced in different sectors, whether it's agriculture, water resources, health, forests, and biodiversity. So we are working on every possible sector. We're trying to understand the biophysical aspects of the changes with regard to the changes in the climate on these sectors, and how does that in turn affect people and communities out there. And if they do get affected, what kind of response mechanisms can basically be target by way of policies that can be introduced, practices that can be taught to people that may help them cope with the changing situation, condition, etc. Now given this context of what I've been doing over the last 22, 23 years, just going back in history in terms of what I was, what I did, and how I came to being what I am today. I was born in a village in 1974, way back in Himachal Pradesh, when medical systems were not that established. Possibly, I was born in an ancestral house in a very traditional way, and when I hear that from my mother, actually, even today, that was how we were born, like me and my siblings. It's a little astonishing and difficult to believe when you see all these health systems, infrastructure, hospitals, and private big hospitals and access that people have in cities today, which possibly 48, 49 years back, people wouldn't have imagined in India. And that too, when you're basically being born in a village environment, and the kind of access to health services and facilities you may have had at that time. So, yeah, maybe I should feel lucky that I could survive without the support of the right health infrastructure around me. And definitely in a lovely setting and background in Himachal. My grandparents were quite well to do, because they were a traditionally rich family in the Britishers' time, possibly uh, in the zamindari system. So they were an affluent family. My childhood was basically spent in cities where my father was basically transferred for his work. So he was working with the airlines industry. We were earlier in the southern part of India, in Hyderabad, so the now Telangana, and had part of my education there, then part of my education in Delhi, because we wanted to move closer to where we belong, which is Himachal Pradesh. So we moved here. So my middle and higher education was in Delhi, and then so I never thought I would basically work in the environmental space, frankly speaking, when I was doing my education, because when we were in school during those days, the only two areas or tracks that people could aspire or had an imagination for, either you're becoming a doctor or an engineer, right? So, and that's how parents were also geared towards motivating their children. So definitely, I took a sciences, a science course in my higher education, basically, with the objective of seeing whether one could contribute to the medical profession. Like after having completed my 12th and thinking about what I wanted to do, uh, that was the time when I think environmental sciences came up as a new issue or topic in the university course. So it was, I'm talking about the late 1980s. And before that, we did not have it as a subject being taught at the university. So therefore, I did feel that this was a new area that was just introduced, looks like emerging. But of course, we were not very clear with regard to the opportunities that this field may create for us with regard to the jobs that we will have, in which we would be able to contribute. We were not very clear. We took up the subject, but as we were basically going through the subject, I just realized it's about everything around you that basically we are learning, whether it's on the plant side. So botany was a subject. On the zoology side, so we were learning about the animal kingdom. On the other side, it was about ecology, so it's nature and environment. So all these subjects that we had to, and chemistry, because it's all about chemistry when we are talking about changes in the environment. So acid rain, then smog, air pollution. It's about pollutants in the atmosphere. So chemistry becomes a very core component of all our learnings. Then, of course, I continued to take up my higher education in the same subject, actually. So then I was further, so it was more a deep dive in my master's into environmental sciences. And then, of course, after that, I joined the IIT Delhi for a brief period of time with the Center for Atmospheric Sciences, where then I was exposed to, it narrowed down further for me from the vast environmental space to focusing on climate and climate impacts, because it was the Center for Atmospheric Sciences, and they were doing some studies with regard to modeling and patterns of changes in the climate using some, black box type models to understand how these changes are likely to construct. So a brief stint at IIT Delhi, and then joining TERI post that, and spending 23 years, 22 plus years now, and on my 23rd now. Basically working on these issues. And I had never imagined, frankly speaking, that this was going to be such a vast area of work. And today, if you were to ask me what I'm doing, I think my lifetime is going to be less to be able to address the issues that I see around and then I'm working around on the clock. So it's been quite a journey in terms of working on different projects in the last 20 to 23 years. I have a biophysical sciences background, but while working at TERI, I just realized and learned this is not about biophysical sciences. Yes, it is about sciences, but a large part of the problem and how to address the problem is on the social sciences side, not on the biophysical sciences side. So then I was forced within the TERI environment to start interacting with people, because everything was about how are people affected, what are people to do with regard to these changes we are talking about, whether it's with regard to water availability in a particular location, drought striking a certain region, an issue of floods or flash floods rising in a certain part of the country. So it's quite massive, and the issues change, and the perspective changes, and what you need to do in that perspective also changes. So there are huge areas of work that you have to get into, and then of course trying to interact with all kinds of stakeholders, because you can't work isolatedly and independently, if I were to say, because when it's got to do with someone who has to do something about this and respond to it, you have to connect to the government, the policy makers, people who are making decisions round the clock, at the national level, at the subnational scales. How do you basically interact with policymakers, decision makers, make them aware of different conditions, ask them what is it that they're doing with regard to these issues, and then possibly suggest pathways or recommendations from our side that we may want them to basically consider. Whether they consider or not is the liberty of the government in terms of how reports are considered, because time and again we do see that whenever scientists have informed governments about what they need to do in their policy making, decision making processes, a large number of times they're overlooked. And a very simple example of that is to do with, I'm just going back to a recent issue in the media that was highlighted, is the cracks in Joshimat that have emerged. And the discussion, when you hear people talking about it, is, it's not that governments were not informed 3 or 4 decades before on what it may turn out to be, because the carrying capacity of the particular location, being a sensitive zone, being the landslide on which habitation was being established. I think all kinds of signals were already there for us, and therefore, how do scientific reports get considered in decision making processes there becomes crucial, because if there is some heed given to that, possibly you could reduce the degree of losses and the risks that you're exposing people and regions to, compared to if you were not to listen to it. So yeah, we do face challenges. We know we cannot ignore the politics. Even if they listen or they don't listen, our job is to tell them. They need to know we are telling them something, and it's a constant process of uh, you know uh, continuously telling them on different issues and aspects, and bombarding them with it. Whether they're listening or not is not something, of course it does bother us, but given the fact that we know many a times it is, whatever you're saying is not heard too, doesn't mean that, as scientists or people working in this domain, we would stop saying those things, because that would be our job, to constantly nudging and telling the policymakers what they need to look at and what they need to hear. So that's one key stakeholder for us with whom we basically interact, work. But apart from that, we also work with our peer communities, other NGOs, research institutes, think tanks, international organizations like the World Health Organization, the World Meteorological Organization, the Indian Med Department. So getting all these different other institutions also together, because they all matter, and each of these institutions has their own knowledge base with regard to different aspects, how they interconnect with the topic that I have to work on, which is on climate, and therefore I have to work on every other sector. So I have to interact with expert organizations uh, from each of these spheres as well, whether they are of an Indian make or an international organization, is needed. Um, and a large part of my interactions also to do with the communities, because I just cannot sit in my office and talk about how communities are likely to get experience, how they're likely to get affected because of climate change. Many a times I do travel to villages, and I spend extensive time on the ground actually with people, talking to them about their experiences and what have they been doing in response. A lot of my learning comes from the people actually, and that's what actually makes me feel many a times that while I may have had institutional learning, an education system through which I have gone through, a lot of what I am able to do and say today comes from the people, and what I hear from the community. So it's much more learning that you get when you talk to people and you interact with people, and that's my knowledge base through which I build myself up over the years. If I look at my childhood, our summer holidays were always spent in the countryside, in the ancestral home. So one of the things definitely I remember, because 12, until I kind of moved to higher education, to a college, I think most of our summer breaks were in the village. And there are a couple of things maybe had an imprint through these interactions that you had at the village level. Of course, you were not realizing that at that time. And since you just happened to be asking me, and I can think about it, one of the things that had definitely disturbed me, and as a child noticing something, is the caste issue. That, of course, I observed and could not kind of understand much better as a child, given that we did have, people from different castes in the village, and of course, we realized that there was something different between some people and other people in the village. So the people of the higher castes and the lower castes in the same community basically having a differential treatment, while at the face of it, maybe in your household, there was not much of a stark difference that they were deprived of food, etc. But there were parts of the house where possibly people from the lower caste couldn't enter. And two main places, if I remember very correctly, where they couldn't actually have access. One is the kitchen of the house, so where the food is cooked, and two is where the food is stored, so the granary. So the granary and where the so everything to do with food actually. So where you're storing, and the surprising thing is, this is the labor, the lower caste, uh, who actually helped produce the food. So they were the ones who were working in the field, and they were the ones who were tilling and toiling to get the food ready for you and reach your granary, which is basically consumed. But of course, food was commonly cooked in the main kitchen, and they were given the food. Uh, uh, but of course, these kind of issues with regard to a restriction in areas, and it definitely prompted to think about what is the difference, why are people not allowed in certain areas, etc. And as you kept growing in your education and kept learning new things, did it digest the fact that the whole country has this structure where caste is a big issue? And of course we experienced it during our childhood, possibly didn't even realize what was happening around us and how people were operating. So one is with that connect with the people. Two is being in a rural setting, a countryside. Every time, when you had a break, uh, uh, most of the land was agrarian. Farming was the core livelihood activity. So being close to farmers, people who were into agriculture, and those were things basically. So that connect, I would say, with the sector, the people, etc., may have happened then. Uh, yeah, and so and possibly and animals also. So I do know that I at one point in time I wanted to be a vet doctor, and one reason uh, you know could have been that whenever I was in the ancestral home, we had a very large fleet of cattle, where basically we were providing milk to the dairy cooperative, and therefore kind of an attachment that grew with animals, and I thought that I need to take care of them when I grow up. So but of course, so all these factors definitely making me feel much more closer to the environment and more grounded to the issues that I now work on. I feel very comfortable when I roam around with into people, talk to people in villages, communities. I definitely don't feel I'm a stranger around going around any part of the country, talking to people, having discussions and interactions. It gives me a connect. Definitely, when I was to choose this as a field for my work, I do remember that there was not much of an encouragement from my family to take it up, because they were not too sure in terms of what I was planning and what I was wanting to do. Uh, mm, in fact, when I was choosing environmental sciences as a subject, people were talking about IT, right? So, and people thought that was a great opportunity for people to get into the IT field, and then a great, job that you may land up with, and packages that multinationals had to offer. So of course, there was a lot of opposition with regards to the field and the stream itself in the 90s to pick it up as a subject to, as a career path. And I remember I had to basically protest in my own home, if I remember, at least for 3 days, not eat food, which basically then made my parents feel that I was pretty adamant about what I was saying. So, in a way, it was basically putting my foot down that if I had decided, I did need them to support me in that process and to take it up. And today, if I look back and I were to think, if I wouldn't have done that and they would have had their way, I would not have been where I was today. So there is, yeah, that was a point of inflection for me. With regard to what I just told about the caste story in the ancestral house and home and setting, there is something that does strike me, which I do need to mention. While these were things we were observing as a child, my grandmother, who was there at that time, and of course, because she had three daughters, and all three daughters were settled in Delhi, and they were not living in Himachal. They were just going there during the summer breaks. So we were spending just 2 months over there. She spent her whole life because, my grandfather had passed away early on. She spent her whole life with this family, which was from the lower caste, living in the same house. As I said, they were the ones who were actually tilling and toiling the land and, helping her run the whole land business, if I were to say. She had while all these caste obligations stood, she had a great attachment with the family from the lower caste because they were the ones with whom she was living all the year round. So when she passed away, and of course there was a will that was basically made, she made sure that she actually passed on a great chunk of what she owned to that family. So I think that uh, and there is a kind of a divide to her own children as well. But but she made sure that he didn't go ignored, his family didn't go ignored, and I think that for me was an important part of what she did when she, of course, maybe she must have thought about it that if she wouldn't be around, then possibly nobody would take care of them. So and she owed it to them in a way. So I do feel proud of that part that she did consider and she did make sure that they were comfortable enough. And today his family, because we still go back to the ancestral place, I hardly go, but my parents do. Today he is so well settled, his children are doing well, etc., and it feels nice to see that growth and development. Okay, so I think I owe it all to this organization in terms of where I stand. And I cannot not mention Dr. R.K. Pachauri in this process, who was the Director General when I had joined TERI, and the leadership qualities he did have actually, by way of which I think he has created a numerous number of environmentalists in this country. The country owes to him for many people and experts who are there today, whether in TERI or outside TERI, working in at least in the field of climate change that I work on today. I know when I interact with people outside TERI, it's either me who's working in TERI or a person who was an ex-TERI who's working in some other organization. So whether in the government or international organizations, name it the UN, the ministry, US based organizations, it's people who have been groomed and geared away with regard to subject knowledge and exposure. One of the things this organization does, it has been a lovely organization to work in. There was no bureaucracy, if I were to say, in terms of approach, in terms of handling people, restricting people and ideas. That was never the case in the organization. So the focus had always been in terms of allowing 1,000 flowers to bloom. So even if you're a youngster, a fresher, you were given the freedom to share your ideas, develop your ideas, discuss your ideas, and in no way this organization has ever restricted anybody from interacting. In many organizations, if you're trying to contact a secretary in the ministry or a joint secretary, you are nudged down and said, no, it's only your director who can speak to them. So you get the details. You youngsters just told you get the details and we'll manage at our end and see how we. That's not the case in TERI. So you basically encourage every youngster out here to learn in that process, interact with people, be independent in their functioning, and develop their core strengths. Uh, So that has been a great kind of a learning process for me as I grew here in this environment. It was like you were thrown in the waters and you were told you have to learn to swim. So you're learning to swim in that process. Of course, your directors, your seniors over here, basically observing you and guiding you a little here and there, but possibly making you stand on your 2 feet by yourself. So that was a great, kind of a process that I had to go through in terms of my own self development and self learning, where I had to invest into. And I feel if they wouldn't have done that with me at that time, definitely I'm sure I wasn't very happy with what they were doing. But basically, today, if I look back, if they weren't doing that, today I wouldn't have been standing the way I was strongly. So, so, so today I'm able to stand and speak and interact with my fellow colleagues and youngsters in a similar way, uh, just because I went through and learned through all that process, and I encourage each one of them also to learn in that way. And there are people who come with their pens and their copies and say, okay, so any task to be done, so what do we do? And the best thing, and what do we do, can you share with us what do we need to read? And best thing to tell them is to go back to their seats and do some self learning, and then come with something and not with blank copies to have a discussion, because it's not even a discussion. If you're just coming and taking people's ideas and you just want to act on it, then you're as good as a secretary. You have to create people who can use their minds, be more creative in the ways to look at issues and what solutions can be developed, be more innovative in their approaches. And creativity and innovation doesn't come from dictation. So definitely, the process for teaching over here is quite unique. We do tell people to self-invest in self-learning, and that would take them a long way to go, rather than have this textbookish language or the Google scientists that we call right now. What happens is they just don't know what is the depth of that area, and that's at times when they're speaking, they are sounding quite uh, on the surface. So therefore, these are things that people are taught. So if people feel happy about it in terms of learning, possibly they go back from this organization learning a lot. But if people feel that uh, they're getting too much of a workload in that manner, or like I don't want to use the word harassed, but maybe they're feeling harassed as well because of asking them to discipline themselves and work more harder, because that would take them a long way to go. So I relate very closely to my mother, uh, and and the connect is very. So it's not a very direct connect; it's a distinct connect that I can see I have with her. She's been a person who has been born and brought up in the village, but she has always been a vocal person. And she enjoys, I, I have always observed since my childhood that she used to enjoy spending a lot of time, interacting with people than, you know, spending time in household chores. So, so I've basically seen her, and she used to enjoy listening to people, what people had to share with her. And of course, the whole village used to come around, in a day or two or something. People just used to keep flowing in, coming for chatting, etc. during the, summer breaks that we were there, etc. And she used to enjoy half the time basically spending time with them, listening to them, talking to them, offering solutions, whatever she felt was right from her viewpoint, etc. And half the time, so but as I grew up, I understood that maybe she likes interacting with the people more than focusing on household jobs. And there was a time when I felt I was an introvert by nature, And I was just not a person who wanted to follow a career path. I never thought I would work for so many years. I never thought I would become a career woman. Uh, but as I got into the job and I started getting into these areas of work where I was interacting with different kinds of people and talking and looking at the issues, the scientific side of it, the social side of it, the policy side of it, I just felt I was made for it, you know. So it was very convenient, as I told you, talking to people, mixing with crowds at the local level, at the at the policy level. So I'm as convenient, comfortable, I would say, as comfortable as speaking to a policymaker, to as comfortable speaking to a person in a village. So the bandwidth is quite large, and I think I feel comfortable and convenient in all situations. And this is something I never thought I would be a person like, but I think I get this instinct from her, because if maybe her settings were quite different and what she was doing. But if I can relate that this was something I always used to see her doing, interacting with people and all, but maybe with a different objective and guiding people and all. And I'm on the other side where I'm taking a certain area of work and having the same discussions with people. So milestones are largely related to have so one is when I entered this field with regard to taking up higher studies. So 92 and 95, 1992, 95 definitely have been decision-making years for me. When I chose the subject and stood my grounds to continue my education in this field, definitely 2000 when I started my career path in this field. Uh, 2002, I was associated with, it was too early, and I don't think so anybody gets an opportunity that early. Maybe I was lucky to get it. As soon as I joined TERI, in 2 years later, I got the opportunity to get associated with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is a large international body, which has been responsible for spearheading research on climate change internationally. So I've been lucky to stay associated with them for the last 20 years. Nobody does that actually. So this is, I think, my 20th year with them, 2022. They have brought out a couple of reports during this process, and I have been involved in many of those reports over these 20 years with them. It's a selection process. It's a worldwide selection of scientists to contribute to these reports. And I think one of the things I can't forget is the Nobel Peace Prize that the IPCC got in 2008. And we were conferred a copy of that award. Each scientist was provided that after the IPCC received it. And I, in my cabin, actually proudly hosted it on one of the sides, which is on the other side. So you may not be able to see it on the screen. And I feel proud of it actually, because of the contributions and the fact that people recognize that this is an area which is, I won't say equally important, it is important and you cannot ignore. So this area of work. So it has something to do with each one of us. So each one of us, so you can't just, move around blind-eyed and say climate change is somebody else's problem. It's not, it's your problem. So we better understand that better before we basically talk about it. So yes, so that's one. And then soon after that, I don't quite remember, I think it's the same year or the year after that, the then Prime Minister actually gave us a certificate from his side. So it was Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, recognizing our contributions to this field of work. And so that's an achievement for me in terms of being conferred that certificate by the Prime Minister. And then many things you keep joining and getting out of, and that's part of the work. You're part of many committees, you're part of many processes, and of course, the reason you're part of many committees, processes, and work that you do is because you feel obligated. You have to contribute to those areas, and you have to be part of that process. And that's how I've been continuing. There are many challenges there are many challenges. N- I wonder whether those challenges are because you're a woman. There are, anyways, many challenges that exist. The challenges are to do with, and forget me as a woman. It would be with anybody who's trying to get the government to do something. The challenges are to do with regard to, dealing with policymakers, because at the end of the day, the action and the response has to come from politicians and policymakers, and how do you influence them? And so those are the challenges normally I face when I basically we have to get the government willing on something and get going on something, agreeing on something. One of the massive challenges, which is not to do with, uh, like getting the government convinced, it's with regard to reaching out to people. And I feel like if we are a 1 billion plus population, every person out there needs to know, with regard to his or her, his or her, you know, contribution, to the field. And unless they are aware about it, what can they do? They wouldn't even know. And how can they help? They wouldn't even know. Because at that unit level, if you were to motivate and gear people up, I think you would be able to create massive impacts. But the issue is that we have not been able to reach to all those people. It's quite difficult, and it's quite difficult. This requires a mass campaign that has to be introduced, and no institute has the resources to be able to launch a mass campaign until the government uh, put themselves in with regard to, taking this forward. So I think these are very, very large challenges in the workspace that basically, you know we face, and we try to see the best we can address it. Uh, and Yeah, so as a woman, basically, I would say, and it's okay. So maybe I do feel it. It relates. I married quite late, because I was so much into my work and the flow of the work. There was no dearth of work. One was leading to the other, and I never basically had thought about my personal life, frankly speaking, that seriously. By the time I had married, it was already in my mid 30s, and definitely I have had challenges with regard to setting up a family, and post marriage also. Since I continue to work in the same organization, the pressure of work has been the same, and I think I've given a lifetime to the work and the area. Today, I don't have children, but and one of the reasons is because my focus has been somewhere else all this while, and I know that because it's basically just that my age has surpassed. I have not planned on the personal front much better as I planned on the professional side. So those are the pitfalls being a woman. And if you are going to be a career woman and you are going to lead things, possibly you're going to lose some things on the other side also. And that's on the family side. Possibly I have a loss. So there have been changes post marriage with regard to the investment of time in work. Earlier, it was really bad. If I were to say, I was a workaholic. And then I think, at least for 8 years, I was working as a workaholic. Then post marriage, I started trying to bring that, kind of a balance with regard to my timings, etc. It did improve. It did improve, but yeah, it still doesn't give you enough time, kind of focus on your health issues. So definitely there are challenges of being able to manage your the work and the life together and give it a healthy turnover. Uh, it's needed because with age, basically, I do feel health cannot be an ignored aspect of your life. And definitely, my current attempt is to try and bring in the health dimension into the life dimension to make it more, because it kind of has implications as you age, and there are signs that are showing up. So definitely, you need to kind of bring that into practice. The objective is to see how I can, kind of balance that out. The efforts are on, but of course, I would wait to see if there are results that can match the efforts that I'm talking about. See a lot of paper around, but that's something with the traditional way of working. So I do need paper to read and sign and things like that. But as a person and how I conduct myself, I think I try to, waste minimally, if I were to say. Uh, Starting from the food I eat, I just can't afford to throw food. If I would have overfilled my plate, I would make sure I'm eating it up. Though many a times I do get a lecture saying that you may harm your health because of that. So I do make sure that I'm only filling that much that I'm able to consume, so that there's no food waste that I'm contributing to. Uh, uh, because and one of the reasons, strong reasons for that is there are many people in this world who are dying of hunger, and you just can't afford to waste food. I think while we are wasting food in some part of the world, there are people maybe in your own country or in Africa who are not even getting a meal a day, and you just can't afford to be, over consumptive or wasteful. So those are ideologies I live by, that I just cannot waste things. Uh, uh, Even a pen, and possibly my colleagues may vouch for that. Even a pen and a pencil, if a pencil has gone down to this size, I will still be using it till the last I can use it, because that's the culture I have inculcated inside me, to not be wasteful. Because that pencil, though it's a pencil, and of course I can get a brand new pencil, and there are tens of pencils lying here, and the institute allows you to take issue it, pens and pencils from the storeroom. Uh, Even a refill that you have in a pen, I use it, even if, and try and reuse it. Uh, the reason is there's a production cost gone into that pencil and a pen. The amount of energy that has gone to produce it, uh, uh, the cover, the refill itself, the pencil, and the raw material that has gone to make it, and it's just being too wasteful to not realize and keep throwing things, you know, uh, using things and throwing things. So that's definitely one thing that I try to make sure that I am not doing that, because I would feel very guilty. Uh, Less wasteful of water that I'm using. These things are there, and but of course, there are other things that I do feel, uh, that do need to be addressed. Which possibly one is cutting down on your paper usage. It has reduced a lot from over the years, but that's also one clear area that I could work on. The other areas with regard to travel, we do a lot of travel, whether domestic or international, and sometimes you start feeling guilty. The whole world's been talking about, oh, so have you done your carbon offsets for your travel? The answer is no. We don't do it as being a not for profit organization. The organization doesn't have the money to keep offsetting our travels. Since we were at the COP this time in Egypt, and then I was just thinking, like, look at the number of people who've traveled down to Egypt, even from my institute, and we were just counting that, and then trying to feel guilty about it. And then suddenly I just uh, came across this news piece where people were flying in chartered flights into the venue. And of course, these high profile events that you have, and the presidents and the ministers of X state and X country and Y country, they're all coming in private chartered flights into, and having a climate discussion and negotiation. Makes me feel at least less guilty compared to them, that at least I was not flying. I was flying with like maybe 500 other people on the same flight. So there was a shared load there, and kind of my footprint may be much lesser than many of the footprints that maybe others are creating, but of course doesn't give you an excuse to say that you can still go on in this way. We do try to see if we now conduct ourselves virtually in many cases. Uh, uh, but I'll be very honest, the COVID 2 years, which basically pushed everything in the virtual space, one of the things I definitely missed is meeting people and talking to people one on one. And therefore, while virtual space is well and good, and we do use it for trainings and seminars when we're giving one-way communications and lectures to people and holding classes, uh, I think when it comes to consultations, really trying to know what people on the other side are trying to say, striking a conversation, because one conversation may lead to the other, right? The conversations are not even planned when you talk to people, and that is where the main learnings are, you know. So, and that is what, personally speaking, I was missing in this whole process. So yeah, we are starting all that again. We are traveling, we are meeting people, but we are also seeing being restrictive with regard to time and money to see if something can be done virtually, then possibly that's happening virtually. I think it's a huge impact with all the interactions that we are having with communities with regard to how they are likely to get affected. What So if they are agrarian communities, we have been introducing new techniques, practices, new crops in certain regions, training them by procuring high-end varieties of crops for them, and teaching them with a highly trained manpower on how they should be seeding their crops rightly so that the production and the produce is of a good quality, so that incomes can basically be affected, so they get a good income out of it, and therefore livelihoods are sustained. So there is a huge social impact when we talk about all this work that we do. In fact, one of my projects allowed me to set up automated weather stations in remote areas in villages, where villages were interested in having a weather station installed in their facility, in their village. Uh, it's not going to allow them to understand weather patterns much better, because they're not going to start becoming scientists and recording data with that automated weather station, but it's just for them to see how the weather station's giving the data out. And there is a forecast element of 24 hours that the weather station gives, and whether they can follow that to be able to be more preventive for the next day. If it's going to rain, do they need to cover their crops up so that the yield doesn't get affected? Things like that. So simple things to start making communities think how information knowledge is generated and used, while a farmer has nothing to do with what information and knowledge is created on the weather side and how it has to be used, etc. He does or plants or does what he wants to do, but it's basically exposing communities to, and this is an area of science, actually internationally people have started calling it citizen science. So it's promoting citizen science in the country in certain locations, trying to expose them to scientific tools, techniques, in forms and formats better understood by communities. How can they use it in their daily planning processes, etc. So it's everything to do with social impact, how are incomes to be affected, how are livelihoods to be affected. And talking about floods and early warning systems, how are lives to be protected from the early warning systems, loss of life, property, livelihoods, yeah, through all these incidences. So how do you basically engage with them, have these installations done, have communications done with regard to the risks? We do studies in all kinds of areas, actually, if you were to say. So now there are heat warning advisories for heat wave conditions that get created in the country. The Met Department issues like to more than 140, 150 cities or 170 cities in the country. We just went around to do. Okay, so that if the government is providing advisories, do we find people using those advisories? So, there's no point giving a warning advisory when people are not even using it or don't even understand what your advisory is all about. So we went around doing a survey asking people in Delhi how are they using the different advisories on heat that are coming to them, and the answer was nobody understands it. So you say an orange alert, a red alert, and a blue alert, and a green alert. What does a green alert mean? What does an orange alert mean? A red alert mean? So if a red alert, I think people need to know what are the standard operating protocols during a red alert. So do I need to evacuate my home? Do I need to stay indoors because of certain conditions? I think those do's and don'ts with regard to the warnings need to be clear. And then our objective would be, once we get to know this is a clear gap area that exists, our job as a research institute becomes then to try and see how is it that we build that gap in terms of making people understand what they need to do when these alerts are sounding, so that we kind of close the loop to create that impact in society, that possibly when there are scientific and technical systems in place to inform you, but still you don't understand what you need to do. And we understand there's a clear gap now over here, and we've understood through a survey. I think we will try. Our objective would be to find something by way of which we can fill that gap in and make people understand what they need to do. So there are huge elements of social impacts that we work on. So one of the things I realized as even I've been growing in the field and there's no end to learning, um, I think I realized in many cases we're going back to the basics and traditional systems, acknowledging traditional systems and respecting them that used to exist. I think there used to be some messaging around them that we have lost somewhere, possibly as people living in cities and being urbanized. Somewhere we've uh, lost the knowledge and the understanding of our own traditional systems and information that used to exist. Because what I do realize increasingly day by day, there was value in our earlier systems. And possibly, a generation above me understood that much better, but even my generation doesn't understand it in the cities. There's a whole knowledge loss between that generation and our generation on many things. Simple things like if you look at the diet for clearly for health reasons that basically being promoted, which is the millets. We consume during our breakfast. We're having oats, we're having flax seeds in it, we're having some grains in it, etc. And I remember, my father-in-law telling me that this used what you're adding to your food in the breakfast used to be a poor man's diet. And I told him, well, this is no way a poor man's diet because I know what I'm paying for the flax seeds. The poor man's diet of the yesterdays is a rich man's diet of today. So somewhere we have lost the value of our traditional food systems, which were far more healthy than what we eat and consume today, which may make you run a longer way in life in a more healthy manner. It's just not about your traditional food systems. It's also about how we used to cook different things. What are the different varieties you can produce from a particular vegetable? It's not just one dish that you can produce, with a particular vegetable. I think as more and more that we're getting into the new systems and ways of living, possibly we're leaving the old behind. And there is great value in that old system and the old ways in which we were known to do things and what we were eating, etc. I think somewhere we need to prepare a storehouse or a knowledge book on these things, on our traditions, on our culture, which possibly, and India has a lot of it. You may go to other parts of the world and may just get this impression there's no culture in this region, but you can't say that about India. You know, you move from one part of this country to the other. It's so rich in tradition, culture, and all that somewhere needs to be documented. It has to be available for the next generations because I feel, even at least I know these things used to exist. If I go down to the next generation after me, they wouldn't even know what was there. So we've already lost it, and there's this knowledge. It's an erosion, and definitely I don't think so. As Indians, we would want that to happen. I do feel that our generations should know the rich culture traditions that this country had, and they should also feel proud and hold up to them, and not maybe because it looks like the current generation seems to be like a generation who follows the West in their clothing, in their uh, you know um, food habits, the McDonald's, the KFCs. Is their general food? It's my own colleagues over here who are youngsters who may be liking that compared to the Indian food, etc. So it's a simple remark, but it's an observation. I think we need to expose our generations more to our tradition, culture, and have them value it. And a simple example I remember to that, maybe I used to be there when I was a youngster, and I had landed up in an international conference, one of the COPs, and one of my directors just told me that when you are, and I carried with me all Western clothes. And one of the things I was just told by my directors, when you're in an international space, it's always good to be wearing your traditional dress because you're recognized and realized by from where you come, and therefore you represent yourself from that country. And that was one remark that I heard in 2003. And since then, in any international meeting that I go, I'm actually in my traditional Indian dress. Because yes, I do want to give a remark in a meeting. Of course, I carry my Western dresses because I don't want to look out of place and context in a marketplace that I'm walking in, because I want to mix with the crowd. But in a professional meeting, definitely my dress code would be an Indian dress, because I do want to tell them that I come from this part of the world and I carry my recognition all across the world. It's a very difficult thing to talk about. I don't think so. I feel I want to change anything in my life as such, because it's been such a great experience. I feel it myself, you know. So I feel, and the strength it has given me. So I definitely don't think so. I feel maybe more of family time if I could have got to spend, and even today, if I could get to spend with my family, would have been a great thing. I spend very less time with my parents even today, even if they want my time. I think I'm just not available because of many reasons of being busy, and that I definitely regret in life. I think more of family time if I were to have. Not, I'm not talking about my home, but it's more to do with spending time with your parents, who may be just there for you for the next few years. So, and this is the right time to spend more time with them. No, my life mantra: take life as it comes, and that's, keep it simple, don't complicate. I think these are things I live by, because it just doesn't help in terms of getting caught in the situation, getting stressed out with things around you. It will lead you nowhere. So I just try to break down everything, make leave things as simpler as they can be left. Not that I don't get agitated at times, but I think most of the times I try to make sure that you know you know I'm more a solutions person. I would try to find a solution around everything. So there problems will always be there, uh, and you can't just remove them, whether it's your life or your profession or something. And I'm more a person who looks at, okay, if the problem is there, so what is the solution for it? And maybe in certain cases you can address it, maybe in certain cases you cannot, but that's not going to bring heavens down. But at least it's making you think what you can do about it. So it's that's the way I look at life and how I convene myself. I tell people that also there's no point coming with problems. Whenever you are hit by a problem, I think about the solutions and come and discuss the solutions you want to discuss. what inspires me. So not a poem as such, but of course, I think I do look up to, uh, you know, to what uh, you know Gandhi basically did for this country, and I'm quite inspired by his biography. So I'm basically talking about Gandhiji and being a big. So I wouldn't say inspiration for my work or something, but I do look up to him with a lot of respect and of what he was able to achieve for India. Being, of course, he was an educated person, but a single man basically creating a mass movement to be able to get a country of this size independence was a great achievement in terms of what he achieved. And then after having basically done that also, I don't think so. He was, so at that point, he wasn't even doing it for basically being the prime minister of this country or being recognized to rule the country. Somebody else took charge. There was Jawaharlal Nehru, who was the prime minister, and of course, the country on the other side divided. So the purpose was independence, but not taking ownership and charge of the country after getting the country, making it independent. Maybe he still wanted to be there, but on the sides, if he would have lived. I think it's a great contribution to the country, and I do look up to him as a person and his life. Okay. Uh, so one of the things definitely I made sure for myself is that I get nothing to do on the other side. So I have support and for all the things that I need to get done at home, so that kind of frees me up and my time for everything else in the world. So that's one thing definitely I wanted, because I didn't think I would be able to, kind of on one hand be a very occupied person in work, and then, kind of justify my role and job on the other side as a home worker. So definitely that's one, and I feel that's pampering myself. But yes, that pampering I do feel I owe it. So that's one. But there are times when I do get worked up, and situations catch you around, and that's when I definitely want to take a step back, and that's the time I spend with myself, with regard to just taking a break and not doing anything which has any meaning that I attach to, whether it's in terms of spending time with the family, or it's with regard to spending time at home or at office. It would basically mean, going anywhere that I want to, just chilling out for a day or two, disconnecting myself from everything else. I just hate cell phones actually. And what technology brings, because everybody is able to catch you where you are, what you're doing on your phone. Calls keep coming, etc. There are times I just mute my phone, because I get worked up with even the calls coming on the phone. So I just and I want that mental space to be created and just away from everything, and just be, either I'm shopping or I'm spending time out eating, drinking, etc. But I just don't want to read my emails and my, so the regular things, I would shut it down for some time to come back to it with a fresh mind. So that's my way of handling things. So my hobby used to be reading, uh, and I was an avid reader when I was a child. In fact, my parents were very worried with the way I used to keep reading things, books. But I think after having gotten into research, fine, I read it because that's my profession. I don't read other than that, because there's so much reading already to do, uh, uh, that I don't think so I can read more than that now. So it's not a hobby, it's a forced reading that I have to do in research, and I do that now. But then the next hobby, I think I would, if I were to pick up in a post-retirement phase, when I retire, gardening and traveling will definitely be on.